So Richie, you want to start us off with,
I'll do it.
Great.
Because of the continuation of the COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting is being held electronically over the Zoom platform. It is authorized by the county's declaration of local emergency, the county's continuity of government ordinance, this authority's resolution, and Virginia Code section 2.2-3708.2 subsection A and 3. The authority directors are not physically present at a single central location, as it is unsafe or impractical to do so because of the pandemic and the county's declaration. The authority directors are participating electronically. This meeting is being held according to section 6 of the county's continuity of government ordinance. All authority members will identify themselves and state their general physical location during the roll call, which we'll hold next. The public has real-time audio-visual access to this meeting over Zoom and real-time audio access over telephone. Both is provided in the lawfully posted meeting notice. The public is also invited to offer live comment during the meeting's public comment period. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. Anyone interested in commenting should send a chat or question to the meeting facilitator or use the raise hand feature. If you are listening by telephone, please use the *9 feature to notify the facilitator. All speakers must identify themselves in the magisterial district where they live or have a business. The public is always invited to send questions, comments, and suggestions to the authority through the county's community development office at any time. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the county's website. So we'll go into roll call. Let's see, Jay Fennell.
here, my residence, Whitehall District.
Peter Taylor.
Here at my residence in Rivanna District.
John Moore.
I'm here at my home in Samuel Miller District.
Sherry Buttrick.
Here, I'm at Jay's in Whitehall.
Rose Emery. I know Rose is here. Spacebar.
She's on mute.
Yeah. She's here. David Emmett.
Dave Emmett here in my hotel room in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Oh, man.
Oh, God. Thanks for cutting out the time.
All right, let's adjourn. This
Yeah.
is bad. David Mitchell.
Okay.
David Mitchell.
I am here in my truck driving home to Whitehall.
That's not as good.
Um, Jenny Moore,
And he's not here.
which Jenny not here, and Hamilton Moses. Jeff.
North Garden.
All right, let's see, Mr. Chair, we have a quorum, so we can proceed.
Excellent. Are there any other matters not listed on the agenda? Anyone from the public? All right, does not sound like it. Let's move on to the minutes. I hope everybody's had a chance to read them. Any comments? Motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Emmett. Doctor.
Wherever we need to do
Um,
votes as a roll call rather than a voice vote.
Okay.
Just to be kind to Carolyn.
Any discussion on the minute?
I wasn't at the last meeting, so I'm not sure whether I should have abstained from voting or not.
That's probably a good call.
Did you
That's
read the
fine.
minute? Yeah. Okay, let's move to a vote.
Let's see, Jay,
Aye.
Pete,
Aye.
let's see, John, you're abstaining.
Yes, abstain.
Sherry,
Aye.
Rose,
I'm gonna abstain too. I wasn't at the last one.
Dave Emmett,
Aye.
Dave Mitchell,
Aye.
Jenny's absent. And Dr. Moses.
Must abstain. I missed the last meeting.
All righty, we have five yes votes, so the minutes are approved.
Excellent. All right, let's move on to Stillhouse Ridge, RPD, boundary line adjustment.
Thank you. All right, so the history behind this project, which this is just summarizing what you all had in your memos that went out. Parcel in red here, 8529A9, was created as the preservation tract of the Stillhouse Ridge RPD. Back, even at that point, there was an issue, and I'll show you in more detail in a moment, of a driveway and a portion of a dwelling from the orange parcel, 8534A, intruding onto this preservation tract parcel. Since that time, there hasn't been any new construction on the preservation tract. We move up to this year, and the Daniel family has purchased the preservation tract. They did a new survey in preparing to build the new dwelling that they're hoping to do, and they have found the same issue with the intruding dwelling and driveway. So they have now requested to adjust the boundaries of the two parcels so the dwelling and the driveway no longer fall on the preservation tract. This is a scan of the plat that they have submitted. This is the southwest corner of the preservation tract. You can see here there's a corner of the dwelling and a good part of the driveway to 6470 Plank Road are actually on the preservation tract where they shouldn't be. So the proposal is an equal exchange of just little polygons of land of 6,656 square feet, which is very precise, to take that corner of the house and the driveway out of the preservation tract and to substitute for that this parcel Y of the same size. It's just a little closer view. And just from the oblique aerials to make this a little more clear, here's the dwelling that's intruding and the driveway. And the proposed substitution is this wooded area along the boundary back here. So how do we do this? 8534 is not under easement. So the typical terms about boundary line adjustments with substantially similar easements doesn't apply. Parcel X, the portion with the corner of the house and the driveway, would have to be removed from the RPD easement. Parcel Y would be added in its place. And as many of you already know, under the Open Space Land Act, no land may be converted or diverted from open space land use unless it meets certain specific standards. I'll run through those now. All right, so I want to start out by saying when you read these standards, they appear to be targeted at significant large areas of land. If most or all of an easement is being undone because of orderly growth and development, such as the expansion of a dense urban area. And so a lot of these concerns that are discussed here may sound a little off for 6,656 square feet, but this is what the terms we have to work within. So one, conversion or diversion has to be determined by the public body to be essentially to the orderly growth and development of the locality. It may seem like an area this small is not essential, but in fact, what we've got to deal with is conflicted boundaries, unclear ownership. Those things are not supportive of orderly development. B, that the exchange should be in accord with the comp plan for the community. This certainly is. They're both zoned rural areas, so they're the same in those terms. Section 2, there is substituted other real property, which is A, of at least equal fair market value. The applicants have submitted a letter from a realtor stating that these areas of equal size are of equal market value. I would just like to add that I believe that the market value of a 6,000 square foot area of land that is under disputed ownership and control is probably quite limited. So I think we can safely say that the undeveloped forested area that would be substituted is of probably greater fair market value. And be of greater value as permanent open space land. I certainly think we could say that an area of woods is of more value than a driveway in the corner of a house. And C, of nearly as feasible equivalent usefulness for use as open space land as the land converted. These two areas of land are less than 250 feet apart. We're not talking about substituting land in another location or with wildly different resources. We're exchanging out an impacted residential portion for a substitution that is an area of woods. So staff believes that all of these standards have been met. So the recommendation is that the authority make a determination that this proposed boundary line adjustment meets the criteria in section 10.1/1704. Again, that's the Open Space Land Act. And just a note that if the authority does make this determination, this will then need to go on to the board for them to make the same finding if they choose, because this is a co-held easement. So just to help you along, Mr. Deloria has proposed or has prepared a possible motion for the finding that needs to be made and how it will be handled. If y'all would like, you can just read that, or I can read it out to you, whichever you prefer.
I can read it.
I'm sorry, Scott, who did you say the co-holder of the easement is?
The county. So this would have to go to the Board of Supervisors. This is true for all RPD easements. The zoning ordinance actually requires that they be co-held by both bodies.
Scott, before you get to the motion, who is asking for this change?
The current owners of the preservation tract. And they have worked out an agreement with their neighbors for this exchange.
Can you clarify whether there are any alterations in the access to the preservation tract that would be necessitated by this change? And in particular, the relationship to that stream?
As far as I know, let me back up a bit here. As far as I know, the access to the preservation tract would be up here off of Stillhouse Ridge Lane, not down here in the area where this other parcel has access to Plank Road. And there are there's a whole stretch here along Plank. If the owners did decide to access from there, that's well away from that stream.
Is there any access easement on the existing driveway into the preservation tract?
Richie might know this better than I do. I don't believe there's any formalized easement there. I think it's just on the property.
I could go back and look, but in my research on this issue, I couldn't find any.
It would be why they made it a pipe stem lot in the first place, to provide that access to the road. It seems to me.
Yeah, makes sense.
So Scott, the owners of the house and the offending land, do they own adjacent parcels that around the yellow area that are different tax parcels, but also owned by them out of curiosity?
I don't believe so, but I can check the map real quick. Just a moment.
What is the current plan for development of the preservation tract?
They can build one dwelling on it, which they intend to do.
Why is this a preservation tract?
Let me go back to my
Was this
trailer.
part of
I'll
the
answer
one
your
that-
question in just a moment, but let me reshare my screen here and I'll show you. This is the slightly over 40 acre residue of a larger property that was divided as a rural preservation development.
Is that
So-
Bundarin?
No, this is completely separate from that. This is,
It's off of Pounding Creek Road near Miller School.
Yep.
And it's for the Stillhouse Road subdivision, right?
right, and they all, lots all have access on Stillhouse Ridge Lane, which goes out onto Pounding Creek Road.
I looked over GIS and I don't see, so the current owner of the pipe stem property is Chrysler. And I don't see
Right.
that name shows up on any surrounding properties.
And I don't, if Richie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe either of these owners were the owners at the time the original subdivision was done. Well, I know the preservation tract owners are new. I don't think the Chryslers
So
were the owners. back then either.
Chryslers were, and they purchased,
Okay.
according to GIS, they purchased that property in 1999. I can't report who lived in the one house close to the encroaching house, the 647.
Yeah, I don't know either.
When was that house built that's encroaching in the driveway?
I don't recall when the house was built. I do recall researching as to whether it existed at the time of the subdivision. And it obviously did because it was part of the subdivision survey that showed that it was encroaching. So it existed when the preservation tract was created. And the encroachment was documented.
And the encroachment was documented.
Yes, sir.
Scott, can I ask you why this wasn't sorted out in 2005, 6?
Yeah, 2005 or 6. Honestly, I don't know. I didn't believe that you could complete a subdivision with an intrusion like that, but the situation we're stuck with to deal with now is it was approved by the county and it was recorded. So now we're just trying to fix that error.
But it was acknowledged and understood in 2006 that there was an encroachment.
It was certainly shown on the plat, and I'm sorry to say I cannot answer for why that didn't hold this plat up before it got approved. I haven't been able to find anything about that.
Right. In my research too, looking back in the county attorney files, and then Scott, we also looked over planning commission minutes. There was just no mention of the encroachment. But the owners of, at that time, the people who, the Haydens who orchestrated the subdivision, they did not own that parcel. Chrysler owned that, Chryslers owned that property.
Okay.
So what are the consequences right now to the new owner of that preservation tract of this whole discussion? I mean, it's something that's been in existence and approved. Is this preventing them from doing what with this property?
Well, I think you could make it difficult for them to get a building permit for a new dwelling when there's some question of whether or not the one permitted dwelling is already there. And then just outside of county regulations, there's, just the liability and potential conflict with their neighbors when they've got a structure in a driveway and, use of the land going on that shouldn't be there.
It'll come up in the title search also and cloud it.
It might make it hard for them to sell it in the future.
Or finance it at any point.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's making it difficult now. I mean, they're just trying to clean it up because it's causing.
Just trying to fix the error that was there long before they purchased it.
Yeah. So what's our course of action?
So Richie, can I just ask a quick question here? So what's been laid out as the criteria for saying yes or no, sort of within the context of law, that's what we have to go on, not something else, not our opinion about X, Y, or Z. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I hope I take the question correctly. The authority as a deliberative body needs to make the judgment as to whether all the criteria are met. So I don't think anyone, I don't know if the authority votes that they are met, I don't think anyone's going to challenge that.
No, that answers my question. Thank you.
I just don't think there's anyone, there's no guarantee that the Board of Supervisors will agree because they have to make the same decision. Is it the only path? I've discussed with Sherry the possibility of a deed of correction. And I think this body would have to make a decision that this was an obvious error and oversight. I'd like the body to be able to make a finding that it was the intent of the parties to back in 2005 to make this adjustment. I'm not terribly confident there's any evidence or we've uncovered any evidence to say that that was their intention. Should it have been their intention? I think everyone agrees that it should have been their intention to make some form of adjustment. But
Scott, has anything been attempted to be done about this in the last 15 years?
No, because until the new owners brought it up, nobody was following it. You said the preservation tract hasn't been actively used or built on in any of that time. So until they bought it and did that survey, nobody was acting on it. I wasn't aware of it. I'm not sure that anybody else on staff was aware that this was an issue that was hanging out there.
Yeah, it sounds like it was just forgotten and, not shoveled under the rug, but just fell off the radar screen.
At
Yeah,
the time of the
what's
RPD,
cleanest way-
sorry,
Go on.
Jay.
So what's the cleanest way to do this without having any unforeseen consequences also?
I guess my concern is that the most serious consequence, not completely unforeseen, is that I don't feel that the findings, particularly the essentiality finding, are supportable. I'm wondering if there is not an easier, lower impact way of doing this rather than creating a bad precedent for the use of 1704, which is a very serious, even though this is a tiny piece of land, insofar as this is done to the least of properties, it's done to the biggest ones. So I'm thinking about whether there are other lower impact ways of doing this that do not involve the invocation of section 1704. Now that I see how small the corner of the house is, I'm not sure why we can't do some sort of deed of acknowledgement of encroachment that, yes, that little corner is on the neighbor, but everybody acknowledges that it's there and we go on with it, and that the driveway could just simply be permitted. Or second, we could also do, a deed of correction that says we meant for this to be adjusted back in the day, and we'd like to get that little corner off there. You may not even need the 6,000 square feet. But I think you've got a problem with the use of 1704, and I would not be supportive of that.
So those are our two routes, either deed of correction or the use of 1704.
Or some form of acknowledgement
Right.
that there is an encroachment and everybody agrees it's all right.
Okay. Thoughts, people?
This is David Mitchell. I'd rather just clean it up with using 1704.
All right. Anyone else?
Would the owners of the large tract be willing to just, could they be some exchange of money so that they end up selling the homeowner that tiny piece of land? It seems to me that's an even cleaner way to do it.
Got to be exchanged for, that's why the boundary line needs to be adjusted.
Why does
what
it have
that-
to be exchanged?
I mean, money-
1704
If-
requires that if you divert property from open space use, you have to substitute it with
But if you're not
equal.
using 1704,
If you're not using 1704, then we solve the problem that the zoning ordinance does not permit any preservation tract to be reduced in size.
okay, fine.
Oh, there's that too.
Yeah.
I
Well,
wonder
and
if
you have the
there's some way to
difficulty,
use statement
the
for an acknowledgement deed, you know?
well, the easement only permits one dwelling on that parcel. And I understand that there's only a corner of that one dwelling on the parcel, but it's there. And I don't know that that zoning or planning would permit the construction of a new dwelling.
It's like a foot on base.
Some sort of a deed of acknowledgement that a corner of a building is there and zoning hereby finds that that does not constitute an entire building and.
Well,
or the-
I don't think they're going to do that because as it stands, even the portion of the property that is not intruding is violating setbacks. So we fix that problem too by doing the exchange. We push the boundary line over far enough that that house is no longer violating setbacks.
What's it need to be, 25 feet?
Side is 25, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And there's no setback requirement for the driveway from the property line?
Just structure.
No, no, just structures, yeah.
So I think Sherry makes a really good point that one can envision a parade of terribles in another scenario where granting a small boundary line adjustment that may include road frontage could have all kinds of horrible effects on the development of a larger parcel. In spite of all of those horrible things, that the short route to fixing this, I think, unless you all have a better idea on how they could do this with a simple deed change, is just to clean this up. And while I personally don't love it, I wonder if it's, for the sake of expediency, something we should consider.
I agree with Peter.
And I wouldn't imagine this would set any meaningful precedent for large areas of land under easement. If anything, it'll provide precedent for somebody else with a 6,000 square foot ownership conflict.
I think it's a bad precedent.
There's another potential issue here, and that is whether the equivalent land is really equivalent. Could you just go back to that a moment? Who owns that land that is to be substituted?
Hang on just a second. Let me put that back up.
Mhm.
It's the Chrysler family. And so this, if you all can see that, come on. At the point of this arrow here is where the driveway and parking area and the corner of the house are on the preservation tract. The area being proposed for substitution is this wooded area back here along the back corner of 34A. So to my mind, the intrusion area has little or no value for conservation because it's already impacted by residential development. The wooded area is much more similar to the rest of the preservation tract.
Are there any restrictions on the RPD easement about timbering, et cetera?
I'd have to go back and look at the terms of that one. They certainly permit timbering. Whether this specific one requires holder approval of a timbering plan, I can't remember. They've changed over the years. But they're very much set up to be farm and forestry protecting easements, not nature preserves.
And just a moment, I may have missed this again, but at the time of the original RPD approval, these two parcels were held by different owners?
Yes.
And they were not related parties?
Right.
Is anything else going on around this RPD that is of note to us. Are there any other developments that are contemplated or in the works?
Not that I've heard of. There's a special use permit that I'm working on County Creek Road. That's several parcels away.
Well, and as far as
Stonehouse Ridge itself won't change because that's already been locked in by the plat approval, the subdivision plat, and the boundaries of the easement. So that's unlikely to change ever.
And the reason I asked about the easement on that driveway, is there a, it's really important if there is an easement, whether that was part of the original thinking of the RPD, whether this is perhaps not an error. If there's a required access over that driveway to other parts of the property that would be affected here, particularly given the stream.
Yeah, I don't recall ever seeing anything that suggested there was a recorded easement or a planned access in that area. I think it really is just built as an error. It was a nicer route to that other house and they missed the line. There wouldn't normally be any provision in a RPD review for the preservation tract to have new access ways across it. We used to do that a long time ago, but we haven't in a very long time.
Right, well, if anything, if that boundary line adjustment did move up, then it would eliminate the possibility of access onto the preservation tract as well.
Right.
How precise are your lines on this overlay?
The lines on the overlay are not particularly precise. The lines on the survey from the professional plan preparer are very precise.
Okay,
Close.
got it.
All right, so what are our thoughts? Chair, you seem to have strong opinions about this.
I think it's a very bad precedent and I don't support it.
All right.
And I'll ask it again, the consequences are that the purchasers of this preservation tract could have problems getting financing approval for the building. Is that true?
I think nobody's submitted written proof that that is true. I think it's a reasonable thing to assume. There's also liability concerns with the driveway on their property. And then, like I said, I would speculate that they're going to have difficulty getting building permits for the house they intend to build.
Well,
So they purchased this property before they did a survey?
Don't know. Sorry.
I mean, they should have known this was a snake before they picked it up.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, they had to.
Yeah, I would agree, but yeah, they're trying to fix an old error that was none of their doing. It was years before they came along. And
it would have been, they would have had to fix it at that point also. So that it would have come up either way and
Yeah.
the discussion would be the same.
Right.
Well, the other part of this is the small parcel with the house on the over the property line is there's zero chance you're going to get a clear title on that property with all of the attendant issues. I
Right.
think.
Yeah,
Right?
it's a cloud on the title of both of those properties.
Yeah,
in my
exactly.
opinion.
Yep.
So the question is, we all want to fix this. And precedent seems to be setting precedent is making us timid, making a decision using 1704. Is that extreme in this measure?
It's a bit of a sledgehammer for a pretty small nail, but we don't seem to have come up with any other viable solution during our discussion here.
I would just point out that we're given the authority to make the determination. And each of these determinations is per application, let's say. So, I mean, I don't believe that we're really creating that much of a precedent here. We're making specific decisions about this specific property issue. So again, I think this is the best way to handle it. These two neighbors have come together and figured out a way to solve a problem that, one of them probably didn't even think about because they weren't part of the Stillwell, and the other one didn't own the property when it was put together. So, I mean, I just think we need to solve two problems here by doing it this way, the way that staff has suggested.
Well, let's go back to that 1704 test. I think what was being pointed out, that the first test is the one that you come up with a tortured answer to, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it was that tortured.
Oh, come on. Orderly. I don't know.
Dwellings and driveways intruding on properties that
Yeah, I mean, orderly is following.
don't belong to them is not orderly development.
Yeah, orderly is following the zoning and building codes, and this is fixing it so that you're meeting those codes. And I think that's orderly.
May I come at this a slightly different way with an objection to approval? It isn't beholden to us to have to solve a problem that was created previously. Our sole purpose is to protect the conservation value of the properties for which we are responsible. And there are too many unanswered questions to approve this today, in my view. One is we are being asked to do this by one of the parties, not both of them. At least we haven't heard from the current owner of the second property. And it isn't clear what the original intent of the boundary lines for the RPD that was approved protected. And without more information about what the rest of that property looks like, I'm not certain that we can say that the 6,000 square feet that's being added is really equivalent, in addition to the precedent. And if there's a way of solving this that does not involve 1704, I think there's a fairly strong reason to do that, which means it may need another cycle with the two landowners. It would be
Just to
easier to have a
clarify-
zoning, it would be easier and preferable to have a zoning variance that was acceptable than to have one that would require using a law that is, or a regulation that is intended for a much more significant use.
Yeah, I don't think you can get a variance for something that you create like that, though.
Right, and
Well,
I feel like,
I'd like to point out that, our hands are not completely clean on this. The county did approve this RPD. So it's not that we can say this isn't our problem. We were somewhat culpable at this.
yeah,
We
we
as
as a
the
board
county.
did, we are part, yeah, we as a board did approve this. We overlooked it.
I mean, that's why I keep thinking a deed of correction. This is a mistake that needs correcting. It's not the same thing as a conversion of open space.
So I'll be entertained. Explain to me exactly how the deed of correction would function. Like, how does that, what's the process there?
I think in this situation, we would enter into a deed of correction that would be identical. Well, let me back up. First, we would approve the boundary line adjustment so the county could go ahead and make that adjustment. And then there would be a deed of correction that would be identical to the open space use easement, except that it would have it may have a different,
So let
guess
me
the
ask you,
parcels would be the same, the size would be the same, it would just have a different, it would have a different plat attached to it.
well,
Yeah, it would
so
refer
if
to
we're
a
not-
plat.
So if we're not going to have to do this 1703, then we don't do a land exchange. The only boundary line we're moving is so that the house and the driveway is no longer.
Well, Scott
encroaching,
pointed out we have
saying?
to do the exchange because we can't reduce the size of the preservation tract.
So,
So at the end of the day, you end up with the same thing.
yeah,
Yeah, we're just trying to figure out a way to get there, and it's not easy because we don't have any clear indication of that the parties intended something differently. And the survey, had the survey back in 2005 not shown the encroachment, I think clearly we would be able to do a deed of correction. That would be fairly straightforward. But what I struggle with is that in 2005, everyone knew that this was an encroachment.
So it's not so you're saying it's hard to intellectually justify a deed of correction when you knew already that it was a problem.
Yeah, I've drafted a motion on the deed of correction that would make me feel comfortable moving forward. This board would have to find that it was an obvious error, I think an obvious oversight, and then I would move forward on that. I can't guarantee that the Board of Supervisors or the county attorney would necessarily agree with me. Deeds of correction generally are used to correct clerical errors, typographic errors, and to correct errors or deeds that fail to meet the party's intentions. I guess we could go back to Hayden. I hate to put the burden on us. I don't think it's our burden. I don't know who mentioned that. It might have been Dr. Moses who mentioned it's not our burden necessarily to correct their error, but we could reach out to the Haydens and see if we can get some history as to what they intended, and perhaps they just failed to. It was an oversight, and they failed to meet their intention.
I would strongly advocate that.
And then the other option is, I know Dr. Moses asked, or I don't know if it was Dr. Moses, but someone asked about the potential of an easement, access easement over the property. I've looked quickly on the circuit court website. I don't see any easements from the prior owner, and I don't recall seeing any. We certainly could ask. I think it's the McDaniels who currently own the property. We could ask them if they, for a copy of their title search to see if there are any easements.
I would strongly recommend that we go that direction and that we, at minimum, find out whether this really was an error or not. That there may have been other concerns at the time that went into the approval of the RPD.
I have a hard time imagining that this was in any way intentional. I mean, there's no reason to include a tiny corner of another parcel that's already in residential
Makes no
use.
sense. It makes no sense. It's got to have been.
It looks like a screw up or an omission, or that somebody forgot to attend to something. It's a very straight line. So it looks like the error was on the part of the house builder originally.
Probably so. And I will say, to address one of Dr. Moses' concerns, the preservation tract landowner and the neighboring landowner have been working together extensively on this, and they worked to come up with this exchange plat that they could agree on. So while I've been talking entirely to the preservation tract landowners, because they're the ones that have the easement with us, I know that those parties have been working this out in detail and coming to an agreement.
I do wonder whether, if you can determine whether just by the look of the situation or by talking to the Haydens that what we have here is a mistake, an error, and an oversight. I actually wonder whether you need the exchange substitute land, because what you would be doing is going back to the original and making a correction, not doing a boundary line adjustment or conversion of open space with a substitution. So you might get away with not having to do that at all.
But there's a county zoning aspect of it. The size of the RPD can't be changed.
But what I'm saying is that you're not reducing the size of something that you should have had at that original size to start with.
Okay,
In other words, it's a screw up, not a change.
got it. Can we
Is this
justify-
property that is this property that has the pipe stem and has the house that's not fully on its lot? Was that part of the original RPD, or is it just a neighbor for a long time?
Again, sorry. No, it was not part of the RPD.
It was a neighboring property at least as of 1999. And it was, it was not part of the subdivision.
The development lots for the RPD are at the opposite end of the preservation tract from there.
Okay.
I think it would be worth asking the Haytons, I think most of whom still exist, what their remembrance is on this. It wouldn't take but so long to do that.
Texting Jess right now.
They've waited,
Look up where that
these
was.
people have waited a long time to get to this point. And so to postpone this for a month, to get the information that everybody's requested and perhaps a sense of better alternatives is, in the general scheme of things, not the end of the world, in my view. Or we can just deal with it through a vote. I'm ambivalent.
Well, I think, Pete, I think that's a perfect observation, because these questions may very well come up with the Board of Supervisors. So if they're not answered,
Yeah,
I
that's a
mean,
fair point.
they may just be going 6 months and hitting a dead end.
I
So-
think if we have heartburn about it, they might also. And so bringing these points up and handling on the front end like this, I think that, as you said, I think it would make it more efficient. And it would
Yeah.
hopefully put some of our discomfort aside as well.
Can we give them a sense of our willingness to approve the deed of correction if that serves their needs? So they have some idea of which way to go with this?
Scott, my recollection is that, well, they started with the boundary line adjustment. I don't recall if they specifically asked for a deed of correction, but they may have. I don't think they're opposed to that.
No, they just submitted the boundary line adjustment, and we raised the no, I don't think they ever mentioned any specific solution. They just contacted us, said, here's the plat. We want to do this. How do we go about it?
I mean, I'm happy to make a motion that says if it's deemed appropriate by the staff and county attorney's office, that a deed of correction be effected, that we support such a thing.
And I would be more comfortable with you all making the findings.
Mhm.
I don't feel comfortable with you deferring it to me to make that judgment.
So what are the, so we need to,
I mean, I'll be happy to,
what are the actual findings? We reach out to the Haydens.
I feel comfortable. I will feel most comfortable. I mean, I'm comfortable with the motion that we have now, but I'm not guaranteeing that it's going to be approved on the Board of Supervisors side. When I say the motion, I prepared a motion for a deed of correction.
You want me
So
to put that up?
findings related to that. But I do feel better if we were able to get some indication from the Haydens or any other party that the intention, that there was no intention for that house to be encroaching, that the intention was that all that would be on a separate parcel.
I'm not sure protocol wise how good this is, but I'm texting with Jess Hayden right now.
Oh, yeah.
So this is, I mean, this is interesting, is that
Well,
this is an
can he
intention.
call in?
I'm going to see if he can call and I can put him on speakerphone.
Okay.
So we're looking for intention.
Well, lack of.
Well,
Maybe you hit it on the button. I'd rather have it come up with a lack of intention. It was just a total error.
Yeah, I think so too.
We're
I think
looking for-
intentionally allowing that to coexist with your your easement is not, or PRD is not,
So,
not a good position to be in, but totally unintended.
no, but
We didn't know anything.
if it varies from the understanding. So if they just say our understanding was that the driveway in that house was to not be part of the preservation
Right.
tract. I mean, it could be an omission. I'm fine with an omission, but if there's something that negates the knowledge that this was encroaching, and we said, okay, that's okay, we'll let it encroach. Sherry, I know, had mentioned that, you know, you have situations where family live there, so you just say, oh, my family lives there, they're going to live there forever, it's no big deal. I don't know that that's a situation. I don't know at all, but I think if this board were in a position to say that the original deed of easement varies from the actual understanding of the parties at the time, then that's the best case scenario.
Yeah, agree.
All right. He's unavailable to speak right now.
So if, to get more information, Richie, what do you need? Do we need a motion? Do we need just,
I think a motion to defer till I don't know what month this is, to we in September to October.
Is there any sort of provisional motion that would suit you, Richie, that would say, if we are able to confirm that this was, the parties either weren't aware of this or it was a mistake that they had meant to have corrected, and then go with the rest of your motion?
I think we can defer, and if Scott and we receive information that makes it clear that this was not what the parties understood, I will go ahead and we can work on preparing those documents, and then just at the next meeting approve those. We can do the motion and approve the deed if that suits. I mean, I have a sense as to where this body's going.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is do you feel like you have enough direction that we can resolve this in the meantime and not hang it up again next time?
Okay.
I'm not hearing opposition to the arrangement. I don't think. I'm hearing significant opposition to 1704. And then also, you know, just we want to, if we're going to go deed of correction, we want it to be as solid as possible so that there's no issue with the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah, we got to get the process right from our spot.
I mean, I'll move to defer if you would like such a motion.
I will second.
All right, is that you, Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
Okay. Any discussion? All right, let's move this to a vote. Richie, can you do the roll call, please?
Let me call the roll here.
Oh, you gonna do it? Okay. You got it, I'll do it.
I can do it. Sorry. Yeah, Richie, I'm having trouble with your audio cutting in and out for some reason. All right. Ms. Emery.
I would support deferring it.
Mr. Mitchell,
Yes, defer.
Dr. Moses,
I defer.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Mr. Emmett,
Aye.
Mr. Fennell,
Aye.
and Mr. Taylor,
Aye.
Ms. Buttrick. Okay, so that's 8-0 in favor of deferring for further consideration at next month's meeting.
Okay, great.
And Richie and I will work with the landowners to make as much progress as we can and the previous subdividers. Alrighty, for something completely different, I wanted to introduce you all to Kim Biasioli, who is the county's natural resources manager, who is here to give you a presentation and update on the county's stream health program. Some of you will already know Kim from her previous work, and she's got quite a bit of expertise in field of conservation easements as well. She was formerly with the Department of Forestry and has been with the county for, I just blanked, a year and a half, thing like that. So here's Kim to give you an update about the stream health program.
Thanks, Scott. And thank you all for having me. I know I'm going to share a few slides here. I know some of you may be familiar with the Stream Health Initiative project, and some of you may not. So, you know, Scott and Jay invited me here to share. Can everyone see my slides first? Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
To share some information about the project and specifically some strategies that have been proposed related to land conservation. So hopefully, you know, I'll provide a little background about the project as a whole, and then hopefully can, you know, inform you about those strategies and, you know, keep you all in the loop on what's going on in that arena and hear any feedback from you if you have any on those. So just to, you know, back out to the real big picture, the Stream Health Initiative project started with the creation of the Natural Resources Program in 2015. And one of the primary objectives of the program when it was established was to conduct a review of the stream buffer requirements in our water protection ordinance. And so that work was done, and out of that work grew this bigger project where ultimately the board directed staff to develop these strategies to improve stream health throughout the county. And because that's just a monumental task, staff at that time divided the project into these two phases. Phase one being focused on development and formerly referred to as the development area phase, but we've adjusted that language a bit recently because of course development occurs throughout the county. And phase two, which is the phase I've been primarily working on the past year or so, is focused on the rural area and specifically on rural area land uses. So you can see from this graphic that phase one is still ongoing. There has been progress on some of the proposals related to development that have been completed. We've adopted some additional erosion and sediment control requirements and additional mitigation measures for unavoidable impacts to stream buffers. There's updates to the language of the water protection ordinance and some other clarifying language. And some of the education related proposals have been addressed as well. And then there's a whole other subset of proposals that have been approved by the board, but are just pending funding and allocation of resources. So that work related to development is ongoing in parallel to this phase two rural area work that I'm going to talk about tonight. So this is a timeline that we set out for phase two of the project. Even before this, you know, we started with a lot of planning and material development and forming our stream health team with different folks with different expertise in different departments of the county, and developing opportunities for the public to engage, you know, through the public input site and our website and our webinar series. So this then we laid out this timeline for the year, and it's broken, as you can see, into these 4 quarterly stages. So that first stage of the year, really, we were focused on outreach, receiving input from the public, hearing what was important and how people wanted to participate in the project. We did that 7-part webinar series about stream health as well. And then the second stage, we really were working with our stakeholder work group. And these are folks who volunteered to participate and have a particular interest and or expertise in stream health. And with the work group, you know, we had, I think, 7 or 8 conversations during that quarter of the year, and really starting to work on defining, you know, a vision and goals for stream health in our community, and then brainstorming different ways that different strategies and approaches that the county might employ to address those goals. And so now, you know, we're in this develop stage. We presented those strategies that came from the work group out to the board in July to receive feedback from the board. And we've also had this public input questionnaire open for the past 3 weeks to receive input from the public as well. And so now we're developing, the proposals, the final proposals that we'll bring back to the board in the fall ultimately for some decision making on what we'll move forward with. So we're trying to scope those out and really understand the costs and benefits and what types of resources we would need to make those happen. And then, of course, implementation of any of these proposed ideas would extend far beyond this timeline. So, like I said, the work group and public proposed a lot of different strategies. There were over 40 that were proposed. So our team, working with the technical experts that volunteered to work with us, sort of honed down that list to the top 16, I would say, strategies that met these criteria. And ultimately, these are ones that we determined had a high or medium impact for stream health. Were generally supported by the stakeholders, at least the ones that participated in this project, and or they had a high likelihood of success, of course, with appropriate staffing and resources. So those are the primary criteria. Of course, there's a lot of other constraints and considerations that we've been evaluating as we look at each of these ideas and continue to as we move forward in developing proposals. So, like I said, we proposed 16 strategies to the board, and all of those fell into one of these three categories: regulations, incentives, and voluntary opportunities, and monitoring, education, and partnerships. And I'm not going to present all the strategies tonight. There's a lot of information out there that, and some of you may have already seen these presentations. So I'm happy to direct you to all the 16 strategies and all of the analysis that we did associated with them, if you're interested. But I'm going to focus now just on those two that are related to land conservation that I think will be of most interest to this group. And so, I'm sure, it's intuitive for all of you who are working in land conservation, but not necessarily for everyone why or how this relates to stream health, right? But of course, we're protecting land and natural land in the watershed and minimizing development in impervious surfaces. And of course, restrictions on stream buffers. There's a lot of ways that we're protecting stream and, even improving stream health. And water quality, and doing that in perpetuity with conservation easements. So that's why these land conservation proposals, landed here in the Stream Health Project. So the first one, actually both of these strategies I'm going to share with you as they were presented to the board in July, with the caveat that, as we are working on developing some of them into proposals, so they are shifting and changing and evolving a bit as we go. So what you see later might not be the exact same words that you see here, but this will give you an idea of what was presented and sort of where we're heading. So this first one is to establish a riparian buffer easement program focused on protecting water quality through new riparian buffer easements in high priority areas, and by strengthening existing whole property easements with additional provisions to protect stream health. And so, when we talk about high priority areas, I think the vision with this strategy is to develop a really strong ranking and prioritization system that would maximize water quality benefits. Because as I'm sure a lot of you know, that land conservation generally has been largely opportunistic. So when a landowner is interested, they come to an easement holder. So this would be taking a bit of a more targeted approach. And so that could be focusing on, high priority watersheds, or on, land that would otherwise be exempt from our regulations. It could include areas that specifically are protecting the public water supply, or have other overlapping conservation benefits. And another idea that's been proposed is to make permanent, for example, riparian buffers that have been established through cost share programs. So there's already been an investment in that, in establishment of hardwoods in that area. So those are just, some considerations, some possibilities, but of course that system would have to be developed if this proposal, or this is a strategy at this point, but if the proposal were supported at some point. And so then the second one that's related to land conservation is to establish a conservation easement assistance program to help landowners with the transactional costs of placing land under easement. And this came up in discussion with our work group because, it's been identified that, transactional costs are often a barrier for landowners to actually go ahead and do a conservation easement. And there is a similar program in Loudoun County as well that we've been studying and kind of trying to understand how that works. So, like with the last example, this type of program would have, a strong ranking and prioritization system, and also would be focused on supporting landowners that really have the greatest need for something like this. And then also they likely require that the easement agreement that would ultimately have additional provisions that would protect stream health. So things like livestock exclusion and protecting intermittent stream buffers. So this one in particular is a strategy that's evolving as we're developing it because, this is sort of broadening out and may ultimately be more about establishing a dedicated funding source for land conservation projects. So that could include something like this where you're offering to help with transactional costs, or it could be to support some of the other programmatic ideas that I just talked about on the last slide, like incentivizing stronger protections on new easements or amending existing easements to strengthen those provisions. So that was a lot of talking in a short amount of time, but that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have or receive any feedback. I'll stop sharing so I can see you.
Thank you, Kim.
Sure.
This is a very encouraging presentation, and particularly the notion of incentives and help with transaction costs. From the easement authority's perspective, we've had a hard time balancing what is traditional agricultural use, that is fields, livestock, with others that are indirectly agricultural, such as maintaining trees and natural habitat. And water hasn't yet explicitly come up very often, but there's reason to think that it will. My question is, do you have enough information based on engineering and topographic studies to know where to focus, and therefore where, when we get an easement or have an easement to enforce, we should be paying attention? The reason I ask that's very specific. I'm in southern Albemarle County along the Hardware River, and both branches of the Hardware River have twice in the past decade flooded into the 100-year floodplain. It happened just again a month ago, and the interesting thing about it was that nobody expected it, because the amount of rainfall that was predicted was not expected to create this degree of damage. Now that has to be occurring in other parts of the county. Do you have enough information to know where those at-risk areas are, and therefore where we should pay attention, either for our own enforcement of easements or for new ones?
It's a really good question. I don't know that we have, enough information. I think we have some information. We have a lot of information in GIS, and there's a lot of, with the climate action plan, actually there's some resiliency modeling that's happening as well, to try to, get at some of the things that you're talking about. So I think there are a lot of resources out there that we could explore and, use, particularly in GIS, to create models and try to predict the best areas. I'll also add that the Chesapeake Conservancy has also been doing some really interesting modeling that I can share links to, but where they're looking at the highest priority areas they've just done a tremendous amount of GIS modeling, looking at where, stream reaches that are unbuffered and areas that are, they have all these criteria. It's a complicated GIS model, but essentially what it's doing is creating a layer that shows where the highest priority areas are for restoration and conservation. So a lot of those analyses have already been done, by folks who have a lot greater expertise than I do. And so I think our vision is we would probably utilize those in combination with some of the specific resiliency planning that's being done in Albemarle itself. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Great.
So Kim, we've talked before, I've been involved in land conservation for decades and have put a lot of land in conservation easement and live on a 600-acre farm that's in a very strict conservation easement, really focused on water quality. I've also been a cattle farmer since 1982. And I'd make a couple observations. One is when you talk about your stakeholders and sort of your findings, I think it's a self-selecting group. I participated in some of your seminars, and I don't necessarily believe that the participants are representative of all of the land stakeholders in Albemarle County. So I'd make that first observation. Just as a general statement, over the decades that I've been in land conservation, a lot of these programs start with the best of intentions, but end up overshooting the runway for really all of the participants. And so I look at the area I live in, which is probably the most densely conserved area of Albemarle County. And I will tell you that it's going to be difficult to change the regulations and get participation in a material way. You mentioned about strengthening existing easements. I'm not quite sure how you could change an existing easement that is effectively a contract. I suppose you could do it with regulations, but again, I guess in my long-winded preamble here, I think there's balance, and I hope that you all achieve balance. I've actually spent a fair amount of time with our supervisor talking about this. Quite honestly, they have no idea what's right and what's wrong. So I think, when you really look at your stakeholders, there are a variety of different people with different goals, and there's a happy medium that satisfies all those. And I hope that that's where we go with this. And again, we've talked about a lot of this at a high level, but it really boils down to specifics. What are the stream buffers? Can they be mowed? Those are really the details that will determine the success of this. And so I think that's really where this thing is going to either live or die, is in the specifics.
To follow up on Peter's question, I don't know a great deal about this, so I don't know the stakeholders list. Is the Farm Bureau one of the stakeholders?
And the Farm Bureau has been deeply involved from day one, and we've met with them. I've met with them, driven out to their farms, several times. I went to their board meeting with another staff member in May, I believe. And so, yes, they have been deeply involved in this, and we've been having conversations with them from day one. So, they weren't on the list when we started, and we reached out specifically to them because we knew that we needed to engage the ag community as much as we could, and they participated, once we invited them. So we had, I the exact numbers in front of me, but I think 7 or 8 farmers, some of them were associated with the Farm Bureau and some of them weren't. They were just people who were interested and wanted to participate. I don't know if we have good representation, of every stakeholder group across the county. We did try as best we could to reach out, through every avenue that was available to us. So that's all I can say, is that we did try this and we continue to try to reach more people through the engagement communication channels that we have available to us. Well, I just want to actually touch on something else that Peter said, and I thank you for bringing it up, about how we would amend or strengthen existing easements. And actually, I just had a conversation with Mike King from PEC, because he did almost the exact same program that is being proposed here, in a county, I think it was Fauquier County, where they had a really specific area they were focused on for conservation. And I think it's a watershed that they were really focused on. And they basically looked at every easement that had been recorded. And, a lot of the old ones had no stream buffer protections or water quality provisions at all. They just went through and approached landowners and offered to amend those easements. And so it's not an easy task. It probably requires some kind of incentive for most landowners to do it. Some may do it voluntarily, but it's definitely something that there's precedent for. There's also a DCR database that I don't know, Sherry maybe knows how to access, or I'm sure you have to request access, but they've been basically inventorying every easement and the types of provisions that exist in every easement in the state. And so I think that could potentially be another avenue for understanding where we have less strong easements that are in high priority areas and potentially landowners that might be open to strengthening those.
And again, I as someone who's done this, and I candidly, I fenced off all the streams on my property at my expense over the last couple of years. I think voluntary incentives are really the path to success. And the what's the program? What's the craft for CREP, or what's the funding? I mean, it's very good. And so I think if you can get voluntary participation, that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, just to throw in, I've worked trying to be somewhat helpful to Kim through this whole process. I've been really impressed by the sheer scale of the outreach effort that went into this to make sure that as many stakeholders as possible were reached and involved. And yeah, the focus really has been in staff's work on this has really been as much as possible on subsidies and voluntary solutions. For example, you're talking about amending older easements that don't have buffer provisions. That's not something that all would be done by force or by regulation. That's something where we reach out to landowners and ask them if they're interested in participating, thinking that a lot of conservation-minded landowners will be, but that would all be voluntary.
I don't think there's any other choice.
No, I think you're right.
All right, this is a lot to think about too, especially what our body's role will be in this moving forward. Also, how it affects us, how it affects ACE. One of the things Kim and I spoke about is that it seems like it would make sense for this to fall under our umbrella, so there aren't conflicting entities or redundancy. But I also see it as a strong motivating factor or more evidence for us to have more staffing and funding as well too.
I mean, knowing how amendments can eat up staff time, I have to say I would be supportive of this being undertaken by the Soil and Water District rather than this body, because I think this body might do little else if that were something that we take up.
It's true. I thought about that.
It's amazing the way one little thing.
Sorry, Sherry, go ahead. You can finish your thought. Can't see you.
Oh,
Whose internet is unstable? Was it?
Kim, your mic is a little cracky on our side. Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off, Sherry, but I was just going to say that we had this conversation with the district. They have no interest in continuing with that easement program that they have. In fact, they don't have the capacity to hold those easements. It hasn't been active for many years. In Albemarle, the last easement that the Stormwater District recorded was in 2003. So that's not really an option, but I will say that any of these proposals, Scott and I were working now with others as well on, scoping them out. So none of them would move forward, or we would not recommend any of them move forward without appropriate resources and staffing assigned to them.
Yeah, we're understaffed as it is. We can't take on new programs. So that's going to be the big question for the board.
And just to add to that, we're all reading the various reports and opinions that are coming out about the sanctity and the utility of conservation easement. So clearly, this whole water quality issue is going to be at the forefront of the whole conservation easement movement. And I just think it's one of the things that we're going to have to deal with. Otherwise, I worry deeply about the whole program.
It's also something simple that everybody can identify with also, versus how some conservation easements are foreign to a lot of people. But water's water. Do we have any more questions on this? I mean, we could go on forever with this. Kim, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kim.
Getting us up to speed on this.
Thank you for having me. And you all are welcome to email me if you have other thoughts later about this, and we'll try to stop, and I will try to keep you in the loop as it progresses and things develop.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim.
All right, Scott, do we have any new business?
We do. Let me share my screen here real quick. All right, so the remainder of the agenda is new business and old business. We have an item of new business that just came up. In August of last year, you all voted to approve or accept the Liberty Hall Farm proposal. Just to refresh your memory, there's a map here showing the property. It's 186 acres on the Meacham River. Could be one division, up to 4 total dwellings with a total of 20,000 square feet. Significant forest protection and stream protection terms, and a building setback on the front of the property. Back when we covered this, the issue that we have frequently dealt with recently about building envelopes hadn't quite reached its peak. And so we hadn't discussed building envelopes back when you all approved this. And so the immediate issue is that since we weren't clear whether or not the authority expected to always approve building envelopes when they were proposed, we thought it was safer and better for everybody if we went ahead and brought this to you. So the donors have now platted some building envelopes, which are shown here, roughly the same scale. And I have verified that this front one, building envelope 3, is outside that front setback area. So there are 3 envelopes there. They appear to avoid the specified resource protection areas. For 2 are in this area here. And the third one is in this open area that we intentionally left out of the forest protection area at the north end of the property. So staff would recommend that you all vote to approve these additions to the previous proposal. I'll be happy to answer any questions, or I can pull up any other information you might need.
So could the very top one is already being utilized, correct?
Building envelope 1, it's not currently the location of one of the dwellings on the property. It's an open area that has been used for some grazing, I believe, in the past, and also was affected by this. You see here that's marked that the pond was removed. They did some stream restoration and cleanup work and took that pond out. So that area has been involved in that.
So these are additional building envelopes. And I'm curious why they didn't identify the existing curtilage in a
Right,
building
Exactly.
envelope.
yeah.
That's weird.
Well, I think the assumption is that those dwellings can remain where they are, but any new locations would need to be in these envelopes.
So would all of these envelopes potentially be used, or are they limited to, I don't remember the specific terms of the easement.
Yeah, it depends on how a future owner or owners would handle this. It's 3 parcels right now. It's specified that there could be but they're all under the same ownership. It's specified in the proposal that there could be no more than 2 ownerships. And each of those could have 1 or 2 houses totaling up to 10,000 square feet. So there could be as many as 4 dwellings on the property. So yes, it's possible that each of these, say, all 3 of these envelopes could have a new dwelling, and then 1 of the existing ones would remain.
And it stays in terms of, so it does stay within the terms of the easement that we approved.
Well, yeah, we don't actually have a deed in hand yet. We just have the proposal summary, but those terms that I laid out for you are what were previously proposed. So the only thing is there was no discussion of location back then because we hadn't deeply gotten into this issue
I do
of
remember,
envelopes.
right, I do remember that that 850-foot structure setback, it kind of crests right there and then drops down and off.
That's right. And I believe that originally it was a 500-foot setback for all structures, and you all changed that to an 850-foot setback, but that it was effectively would permit sheds, farm buildings, fences, things like that, but it would keep the dwellings out of that larger setback.
Right.
So these are obviously potential future sites for otherwise approved dwellings. Just to be clear, there are more sites than there are potential building. In other words, each one of these sites couldn't, under the terms of the easement, have separate dwelling units on them in addition to what's already there.
Yeah, the total number of dwellings doesn't change in the proposal. This is just giving somebody some choices.
Right. Okay. Just to be clear. Yeah.
There's not going to be more than 4 dwellings, no matter how they're laid out.
Did we approve this a year ago and request information on where the structures would be, making it contingent on that?
No, it was just approved with no discussion of building location whatsoever, other than that front setback. Envelopes hadn't really come up yet.
And we approved 180 acres with potentially 4 subdivisions.
No, 4 dwellings, 1 subdivision. In other words, this could be divided between 2 ownerships.
Yeah, irrespective of the current parcel boundaries.
Right. It could be re-subdivided, adjusted so that there were, instead of, there's 3 parcels, one of them is very small and totally unbuildable, but they could move all of these internal lines around, say split it down the middle or wherever they wanted to. And each of those halves could have 1 or 2 dwellings.
But they can't pack 3 on one of them.
Right.
We could, couldn't. What is it?
And they're not showing where the division would occur into 2.
No. Yeah.
So have just to ask a procedural question, and again, this isn't a loaded question, but we've already approved this, right?
Right.
So I guess I don't quite understand. Are we being asked to reapprove it with these additional restrictions, or?
No, I mean, in some regards, it's a courtesy and a clarity, but it's, now that we're looking at it, we feel uncomfortable with it.
Well, they're amending the proposal. I mean, they didn't have building envelopes before.
Right.
They proposed them now. So I think it's incumbent on us to review the envelopes and say whether we think they are sensible. I have to say that leaving out the main house and the area around that main house does not seem sensible to me. I
It's
remember the
confusing.
property when it had 4 or 5 dwellings all clustered around the main house.
Sherry, there are many more than 4 or 5.
Well, I was being conservative, Rose.
Well, there must be at least 10 or 15. I'm not exaggerating.
Well, I could actually name it. AC's house, there was the tower, there was the law office, there were a couple other houses.
Chalet.
So, oh yeah. But that's the sort of thing people tend to do sometimes on rural property with limited development. And I also don't think it makes good sense to have the major dwelling, main house, manor house, whatever you like to say, not be intentionally in an envelope.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that.
Right. I think that they're thinking with probably, like Scott said, if it's existing, it doesn't need to be in an envelope, but it seems like for our clarity, to put it in an envelope makes it align with the future proposals as well.
And this enlightened body's thinking, I think, might want to help them with their thinking.
I mean, would you all be inclined to approve this, provided that they add an envelope around the existing dwellings that stays out of the riparian buffers, for example?
Yeah, because at least then it would limit, if they wanted to add yet more structures around that main dwelling, it would limit where those could go. So that only makes sense to me.
You'll find yourself in 5 years doing a deed of correction.
All right, Sherry.
Can I ask a question of Richie? Is the reason they're asking for this envelope has to do with the tax benefits that we've been getting lectured on for a while?
That's pretty much the movement now. I think all donations are going to come with envelopes.
I think that, yeah, I think this is more of an IRS issue that they're trying to avoid on the front end.
Yep.
And I don't know if not identifying the main house in an envelope, has negative consequences. It does sound prudent that they should. I agree that they should be required to put an envelope around the main dwelling.
Yeah, it's just the plat makes it misleading as strong.
Yeah.
Well, we can certainly put to them. Like I said, I think they were assuming these envelopes applied to new structures, but shouldn't be all that hard for them to add one more.
Right.
And I think unlike some other envelopes where they build a structure and then the others are extinguished, I think this is one where the envelopes just continue.
Yeah, I mean, it's setting out options that people can choose from in the future.
Okay.
Would we be comfortable saying that we would approve this subject to adding the building envelope for the existing structures?
That fully contains all of the existing structures around the main building. Yeah.
All of the structures or just all of the dwellings? Because these envelopes only apply to dwellings. These don't apply to farm buildings and things like that.
How many of the structures that are around the main house are being used as dwellings?
Most of them, a lot of them.
Most of them.
Only 2 of them have official county addresses.
They're pushed over, if not all of them,
There's
but
basically a new house and a chapel, and that's it.
if history's any guide, they're gonna end up wanting some kind of a guest house, some kind of a mother-in-law's house, and it's not gonna be permitted because there's no envelope.
Right, that's exactly right. The way it is right now, the only place they can build a new residence is inside one of those patches.
Right. So I don't know, maybe not putting the existing one in an envelope is a good thing. Is that what you're getting
That
at?
just occurred to me.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I don't know.
But it's only one dwelling per envelope, and so it's already got a dwelling in there. If we add it, that envelope.
I like adding it because otherwise it sounds like you're picking a fight down the road.
Wait, is it one dwelling?
But that's y'all's call.
Maybe it's Scott or Richie. Is it one dwelling per envelope?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay, sorry, I misspoke.
What we approved before, we did not specify that all accessory structures would have to be within the envelope.
No,
No.
you all only specified that dwellings had to be outside that 850-foot setback.
In the forest, the North Forest is protected also.
Right.
Yeah.
I had originally proposed a 500-foot setback that allowed no structures at all, and you all didn't care for that and changed it to a deeper setback that only affected dwellings.
I think in the past, when we've had properties on the border of 40 acres, our threshold, we've said that accessory structures should be within a certain distance of the main dwelling, of the dwelling on that parcel. Let me tell you why I
In
asked.
some cases, yeah.
Let me tell you why I asked the question that way. In one of the things being used right now by developers in New England is the notion you take a property like this that has an existing large house that is converted to some kind of a joint use for clubs, guest rooms, party facilities, and so forth. And then you sell a number of independent parcels separately that own a share of the main manor house. This is being done all over New England right now. And it's a way of getting around zoning and in many cases easements that would not permit more structures. I don't know that we've seen that yet in Albemarle County, but it's dead set certainty we will. And if you have no restriction on how close accessory structures are to either existing ones or future ones, you really create a setup that doesn't clearly protect any conservation value.
We've already allowed for the structures to, we've already permitted the structures under this easement to be there. And if they can divide it into two parcels, that it would make it.
A lot of our discussions in the past have centered around avoiding future conflicts by not overly specifying, especially non-dwelling structure locations when they weren't all that important. We didn't care about these envelopes because we set up things like the setback, the riparian buffers, in this case, a forest conservation area that would definitely exclude all of those structures. And then the rest of the property was open and flexible so that we didn't have to have a fight over an envelope or a 6-foot discrepancy later.
Scott, does this, in your view, as proposed, meet a conservation purpose?
Well, I think that the proposal without the envelopes already met a lot of significant conservation purposes. We've already excluded dwellings and other structures from the most important areas by protecting the scenic highway, the riparian buffers, and the large forest block. These envelopes are something that the donors need for their own purposes. They don't conflict with the conservation purposes of the easement the way they're placed. So I see the point of adding one for the existing structures, but I don't see any problem or any conflict with the conservation purposes that were already established under the proposal by adding these envelopes.
Yeah, they neither detract nor necessarily add to the conservation value because it's not a scenic easement. It's not, there's no view shed issues here. So where the houses are on the property are less of an issue than how many are there. It seems to me.
Yeah, and there is a scenic aspect at the very front of the property, but we've covered that with the setback.
That with the 800-foot setback.
Well, are you asking for a motion on this today?
I think we should make one. There was one out there about adding the envelope. Sherry, was that you?
I didn't know I'd consciously made one, but I'm glad to make one. Or if somebody else has one out there, I'm happy to second it.
I didn't have anything written down.
All right, I'll make a motion that we approve these envelopes, but with the addition of an envelope around the main house and curtilage ample enough to allow secondary dwelling if somebody wishes such a thing.
Is a secondary dwelling permitted under the terms of the easement?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it just all depends on how they decide to lay it out.
Right, yeah. Okay. Just didn't want to. go
How come one of the 15 dwellings that's already there doesn't count as their additional dwellings? I'm confused.
They've demoed them already.
Oh,
Put 'em on. They basically emptied the property.
okay.
Sherry's motion is to approve a secondary dwelling for the existing house or for the other parcels?
No, my motion is not that at all. My motion is to approve the submitted building envelopes, but with the addition of an envelope surrounding the main house area. In the main house area. In other words, to include the main house and its immediate curtilage in an additional envelope.
So that keeps a secondary dwelling from straying too far away from the main house also.
Well, but does it permit any secondary dwellings?
Each of the two potential properties this could be divided into can have either one or two dwellings. And then there's a cap on size of 10,000 square feet, which could be in one dwelling or two at the owner's choice.
So I'm taking the motion to be to approve the envelopes on the condition that they add or designate an envelope around the main dwelling and the curtilage. And that will just leave them to determine how big of an envelope they want to do. Is that right?
Yeah.
Do we have a second?
I'll
Second.
second that.
Miller? I heard a couple. I saw his mouth move. Discussion. Move this to a roll call.
Scott, you want to do it? I don't know how my
Yeah.
microphone is.
I'll do it. Mr. Fennell,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor,
Aye.
Mr. Emmett,
Aye.
Mr. Moore,
Aye.
Dr. Moses,
Aye.
Ms. Buttrick,
Uh,
Ms. Emery,
Aye.
Mr. Mitchell.
Aye.
All right, motion passes by 8-0.
Excellent. I'm hesitant to ask. Is there any old business?
I don't have any.
Yeah, anybody else? All right. Your motion to adjourn.
so made.
So moved.
There's no second.
All right, all in favor.
Aye.
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 Thank you, folks. Scott, Richie, thank you all very much.
Thank
Everybody
you.
else,
Thank you.
See you guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.